Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is still in Japan, though the turn toward her next stop on this first overseas trip has already begun. After meeting the Empress of Japan in a slightly less super bad overcoat than yesterday's amazing Matrix-worthy number, Secretary Clinton held a town hall-like meeting at Tokyo University today. There, in preparation for the next stop on her trip, Indonesia, she told the crowd that the Obama administration would make a, quote, concerted effort to restore the image of the United States in the Islamic world. She said the U.S. will seek to, quote, enlist the help of Muslims around the world against the extremists. Indonesia is, of course, the world's most populous Muslim nation. Her traveling there on her first trip abroad is a big deal diplomatically. And given what just happened in the world's second most populous Muslim nation, Pakistan, big diplomatic deals seem particularly important right now. In order to grasp what just happened in Pakistan, we're going to need to call in the big cognitive guns here. The weapons of mass explanation. Maps. Yay! Forgive my inevitable bumbling here, but this is important. All right. Here is Afghanistan, right? And here is Pakistan, right? Afghanistan is where we've already got 33,000 U.S. troops. President Obama today described the situation in Afghanistan as deteriorating. He okayed a request for more than 10,000 more U.S. troops going to be there in Afghanistan. They'll deploy, it's Marines and soldiers, they'll deploy this spring and summer. Now, when we talk about Afghanistan and Pakistan, we talk about them together, right? We've talked again and again about these dangerous border areas. The tribal areas. This is a familiar map, right? The caption in your head on this map is something like Talibanistan. Maybe this is where Osama bin Laden is. Here is what is so scary about what has just happened in Pakistan. What just happened in Pakistan wasn't here. It wasn't in Talibanistan. It wasn't in the border areas. Instead, it was here. It was up here in Swat. This is where the Taliban fought the government into an agreement to institute Islamic law. And not in the ungovernable tribal areas along the Afghan border, but in this area up here, up in the mountains, right? It was an area that was once known as the Switzerland of Pakistan. It is the Swat Valley. It was once a tourist destination because it's considered to be so pretty up there. Well, now the Pakistani Taliban, they're essentially in control of Swat. Just so you know, Swat is only about 100 miles from, what's this? Oh yeah, that's the capital of Pakistan. That's Islamabad. And maybe this is a bad time to mention that Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Madam Secretary, any comment on this?
I want to get the whole picture of what it is they're attempting to achieve. There were, as I said, some contradictory communications from the government as to what was really going on, and we want to sort that out before we say anything.
That has to be a concern.
Well, look, the entire situation in Pakistan is a concern.
Yeah, to say the least. Britain is also expressing its concern. A senior U.S. Defense Department official described this as a negative development. NATO put a rather fine point on it, a spokesman saying that this offers Islamic extremists a safe haven for Islamic militant extremists in South Central Asia. Why is this sounding so horribly familiar? We haven't even caught bin Laden yet in the aftermath of what happened the last time these guys had safe haven in that part of the world. Joining us now is a man who has something to say about the bin Laden issue, a man who is much better with maps than I am, a man who is trained in using geographic analysis to find hard-to-find stuff, like, say, endangered bird species, and maybe now the head of Al-Qaeda. Thomas Gillespie is a professor in the Department of Geography at UCLA. Professor Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You have used geographic analysis to predict that Osama bin Laden might be in one of 3 specific compounds in one specific city in one specific country. In order to tell us how you got to that finding, can you explain how your modeling works?
Yes, certainly. Well, to start off, if you're looking for anything, being an endangered species or a person, you really have to approach the question at different spatial scales, at a global scale, a regional scale, and a local scale. And here we have a nice image of a global spatial scale. So what we did was basically we had to find information on his last known location. which all we have is Tora Bora in 2001, so that's how we begin the process. And then we add some theory based on biogeography, or the distribution of life, which is called distance decay theory, which means the further you go away from that one point, the more likely it is that you won't find the similar species composition, or in the case with humans, people that have the same beliefs or language and so forth.
So your last data point is 2001 in Tora Bora. I'm assuming that means that if you had any further data after Tora Bora, your model would be that much more precise.
Yeah, in general, like we do have a model that can be updated. It's standard and repeatable like any other in science. So the more up-to-date the information, the more accurate the model will be.
What are the assumptions that you made here about bin Laden? You had the data point in Tora Bora in 2001. What were the other things that helped you narrow it down, about his needs, about the limiting places that he might not be?
Well, yeah, well, at a global spatial scale, I mean, you can ask the question, did he turn around and go back into Afghanistan, which seems kind of unlikely. But actually, as you go into a regional scale, that's where you really kind of tease out the question of where he hypothetically might be. And here we have an image. This is a nightlight image that's taken at night in 2007. And you can see the small city of Kabul on the left-hand side, and then Peshawar in Pakistan on the right there. And then if you look in the federal tribal areas, which are outlined there, you can see some small cities. But our theory is basically based on this, that extinction is lower in large towns. So if he actually lived in a small town that can be easily monitored, searched, or where people can spread information on him, it's just not very likely that he'd be in a small town, and that's one of our major assumptions. So
you essentially assume that he would have to be in a large enough city that he could preserve some sort of element of not being seen.
Yeah, and then if you think about, and the theory we use is called island biogeography, which looks at rates of extinction and the size of a habitat, which is like a city island.
How else do you narrow down? Once you figure out what size city he might be in what region, how do you get more specific than that?
Well, in this image here, what you have is his last known location, which you can see is not very far from a city right over the border in Pakistan, and the city's called Parachinar. It's the large red dot there, in which you can see it's clearly the largest city in the region. And if we pulled back from that last image, the only other large cities were Kabul and Peshawar. So this is kind of suggesting that closest to his last known location, this city would have a high probability of housing him, under the theory that, of course, extinction would be higher in a very small area.
Now, what else about that city is useful in terms of finding where he might be? What else do you need to know about what kind of place he could be hiding in?
Well, that's a great question. Once you get to this point where we have a city picked out, the next thing is we use life history characteristics of Osama bin Laden to figure out a structure that matches his life history characteristic. So, for instance, the man is 6'4". Obviously, we have to look for buildings over 6'4". He needs electricity for a dialysis machine. We selected buildings within Parachinar that had electricity. We looked at things like protected structures. So you can see on this one, there's a wall around it. You can actually see turrets on this one. And then we looked at other things like privacy, and in general, finally, we looked for, there has to be a tree, because if he goes outside, I'm sure he's positive that people can look down on him. So when you apply these life history characteristics for every building in the city of Parachinar, 3 popped out as being places where hypothetically he could be, and this proposes a hypothesis that can be tested and rejected.
In terms of testing that hypothesis, anybody in Pakistan reading your study and knocking on the door of any of these buildings since this came out?
Well, that's a good question. I guess they have a chance to win $25 million if they do go in there and take a look.
Good point.
I don't know what the per capita income is there, but it is in the federal tribal areas, and obviously if you look at any Let's Go guide or travel, it's very difficult for most people to go travel there.
Any response from the CIA or any other U.S. government agency?
Well, you know what? I'm a geographer, so what we do is, we kind of feed the CIA students that come through our school. But no, most of my work is really academic. And before we submitted this to a journal, we did, we went to the website and submitted it to the FBI as instructed by the website. But that's about the extent of it.
One last question for you. I know you did a study of the lights in the night sky leading up to the surge in Iraq. Can I just ask you really quickly what the purpose of that was and what you found?
Yeah, well, that one is very easy. Basically, we just looked at nightlight imagery before the surge and after the surge, under the hypothesis that if the surge had worked, the night lights should increase as the quality of life increases. But what we found out basically was the lights actually went down after the surge, and even before it started, there had already been ethnic cleansing in a lot of the neighborhoods in the south and in the north.
Professor Thomas Gillespie of UCLA, single-handedly making geography cocktail party conversation across the country right now. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much for your time.
The study about Osama bin Laden was published online today by the MIT International Review.